Hey guys, thanks for tuning into the podcast. This episode, we talk with Shannon, our in house medium, about the origin of morality and why it's important to be authentic, the difference between thinking and feeling. We talk about the egoic operating system. We talk about spirituality and religion. A couple other topics that I think you'll find interesting. If you do find it interesting, please like and follow us. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's talk about had a cool experience this weekend where for multiple people involved. For me, it was a period of it was experiencing a transition from a thinkingness about things and being in the mind, which thanks to you, I've had sort of a window into. This is probably a better way of explaining what you do is, for me anyway, when I've had a hard time understanding how I feel about something, which sounds trivial, but it really isn't. Like when you can't access your feel very well, it's agonizing because you know what's right deep down, but you don't really have access to it, and then your mind can be the biggest block ever. Mm-hmm. And so I had a crazy experience where I already understood things in the mind at a high level, but I feel like I'm moving more into the body where I feel things. It's like the coolest thing ever. And one of our friends that same night had, I feel he'll be digesting that for a long time, but he sort of had this experience of what is right, what is wrong, faced with this dilemma that everyone gets to at a passing in the road. And it seems like a lot of people that get into like new age spirituality, or they branch off of religion, they're faced with this binary, it seems, thing that either nothing matters or things matter. And a lot of people go for nothing matters, and they get into like some crazy stuff. And so I thought it'd be cool today to talk a little bit about the origin of morality and the difference between, thinking, the way things seem in content versus context, the way things are different in terms of appearance and essence. Like an example would be, I could go to church and appear to be Christ-like. I could do all these things, check all these boxes, just like the Pharisees did, but in essence, I'm completely missing it.
Totally.
So that's a difference. That's why it's a huge thing. It's not like this isn't a trivial thing. So I thought we could talk maybe a little bit about that, the origin of the truth of morality, how we access it, and anyway, I have a handful of questions from there. But for you and all your customer or your clients that come in and they need help getting from mind to spirit or spirit to body, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest things, the foundation of what I'm trying to teach in my sessions is people understanding their different operating systems, right? So we are in one beingness, and most people don't ever really take the time to go, what part of me is speaking truth? Do I really believe this? What part is talking to me right now? So the first thing I always start to talk to people about is that in the three operating systems, you have the egoic operating system that processes through thoughts. In its nature, it's dualistic. So it's black or white and has a hard time accepting the all, right? And its narratives can get created from the time we're very young. And a lot of times we don't remember where this programming came into, but a lot of it comes into very black and white. And then you have the body, which is actually really neutral. It's just feeling, it's interpreting what the mind or the spirit is saying. And the spirit, the soul, which I believe is the meeting place of your higher self and God. It holds the essence of your truth. It holds all your experiences, your personality, and your purpose. And so that part is usually trying to communicate, but gets overridden by all the thoughts, right? So a lot of people think they are their thoughts. And I tell them, you're not your thoughts. Like there's an essence, there's a truth to you that is deeper than just right here, right? But it's hard and it's confusing because you're in it all the time. And most of the time, like up until like these conversations, right? It's not like you're hanging out with your buddies and you're like, how is your thought process going? I mean, like, would you ever even think to ask that, right? People don't realize like, and what I mean by that is the ego kind of hijacks things and kind of goes off on its own narrative, and it's doing all this without people being very conscious of what their thoughts are saying. And so the majority of what I see coming in is these repetitive negative stories that are continually circling around, and they're unaware of them, but they're feeding in this negative energy. And a lot of them, what I always find at the very core, go back to a feeling of unworthiness, right? And so part of the structure that we go into, like if we're talking about going to church and stuff, it's a way to go externally to be like, I'm checking all the boxes, right? But am I actually listening to my true self? Like, what is this part of me that's trying to express, that's just trying to be, literally? But we really don't give it the time or even have the patience to listen. We're in a very fast world, and we're trained at a very young age to trust in the external. We rarely, and even going to church, they're telling us trust what they're saying, not what your soul is saying to you, right? So when you're talking about learning how to feel and coming out of thinkingness, what you're trying to do is shift your operating systems to blend into where they're all aligned and working together and not against each other. And so the mind will trick and puts a lot of illusions of separation and fear and I'm not worthy if I don't do these things, right? And that is not where your worth comes from. Your worth comes from your essence of your soul. And so that's the part that when people come in, I'm trying to help them understand what part is speaking at that time, and then teaching them to start asking, do you believe what your thoughts are telling you? Have you taken a time to even witness those thoughts, right? And so part of what you're working on, right, is that you've been really good at taking these really deep topics and being able, like, and that's what I love having conversations with you, because my mind can't even process like you, but I'm able to sense the essence of it. So when you're articulating a lot of these things, you're spot on. But but what you're working on is integrating them into the whole and having a feeling and not just up here.
Exactly. Yeah. I would say The Untethered Soul is a good book. I don't know if you read that one. But I thought it was cool how they're like, well, who's observing the thoughts? Right. If you are your thoughts, who is it that's like, oh, that was a silly thought, you know? It does a good job. Starts calling that
the roommate.
Yeah, the ego is the roommate, and even give it a name. So they start trying to separate the body from spirit, and that's just a crazy, profound thing that most people don't know. That literally most. I mean,
the majority.
Certainly, 80 to 85% of the globe that's operating in the animal instinct for sure, but you aren't even able to be aware that you are until consciousness level 200, or once you get to a certain point where you can actually feel these spiritual realities. You don't even know, you just literally a program in an animal,
right? Which
is crazy. So one thing I was pondering about that is, why is authenticity so important? Because I thought, why does everyone appreciate authenticity even when it's a lower vibration? Like, let's say even if someone's authentically being an asshole, there's still something about the fact that they're willing to just be that way, and it's something valuable. And I was wondering what that was, and maybe tell me how you feel about this. But if we are a spirit having a human experience, and we're meant to make choices, every choice we make is either creating separation, which is sin, which is a fearful decision, or it's creating unity and connection, which is love. And so every time you do that, if you do that in a sovereign way, through your own free will and choice, you make a decision, and then you experience the repercussions, whether those be positive reinforcement or a negative reinforcement, which I like that the law of one calls catalyst, because you can just use that as a catalyst to put you back into alignment with love, which is what righteousness is. So without free will and choice, without being able to do that, you can't actually become righteous. Now, let's just say, and again, I, by the way, grew up very religious. My family sailed across the ocean and walked from New York to Utah in 1860 and lived in a hole in the ground. And I'm really grateful that they fought for, or they, sacrificed to have religious freedom. And I'm grateful for all their religion. I love all the religions out there, and everything they teach is awesome and spot on. But if you're not careful, what can happen, even if the religion's teaching the correct, let's say, doctrine, the truth, if you're actually complying with that via, let's call it out of fear or compliance or like servitude, you aren't actually consciously choosing it. So you could actually be in the mind, let's say, I don't want to use the word being righteous, or say I'm acting righteous,
right?
But you're not really choosing into that consciously, and you're not really bought into it. And when you're not bought into it, you're really also you'll find the ways around it, and you'll see like a business person completely rip someone off in the name of like,
oh yeah, in the name of Jesus. We started a lot of wars in the name of Jesus, right?
Yeah, or somebody like they have a justification. Well, if it doesn't fall under this thing, and I just look for funny like provo stories about all the weird stuff that like people do down there. I'm not even gonna bring them up, but and by the way, I don't even want to bash it, because I would prefer the over religiosity to the opposite, which is more of like this hedonistic spiral. I'd rather have the bizarre over, but it's also not a healthy thing, right? So,
right. Well, like anything, it's about coming into balance, right? So even though religion is based off of a good principle or to bring people into wholeness, right? Man has taken put in a lot of rules and saying what you can do and what you can't do, right? At the end of the day, the soul, what I believe of coming into the spirit, what God is seeking for us to do is come into wholeness, which is an awakening process. So a lot of people, here's what's also fascinating. Going to church, there's not as many conscious souls in there as you would think. Sometimes I joke and I'm like, you know where the best place to hide from God is? Church, right? Because I'm doing all the things. I'm doing all this. I'm showing up. I'm sitting in my pew. I'm doing this. But really, when I'm working with people, there's this shift where it's like, yeah, you're doing the things. You hit the check mark, but is that filling you? Are you able to fully see it? And when you're sleepwalking and you're not conscious, you're not making conscious choices. You're in a reactive state. And so even if you're going to church and you're not conscious, you're in a reactive state. So then you're molding into like what the herd's doing. And it's like, okay, well, I have to come and do communion the first Sunday of the month, or I need to do this, and what people, and like, or even volunteering, right? It's not a bad thing. But starting to look at the service part of more of being able to see people instead of even coming up from here, like meaning I'm so righteous because I went and helped some homeless person or gave them some food or whatever, but that's coming from a separation point instead of actually coming in from I'm holding space and I'm seeing you, I'm witnessing you, which is a non-judgmental state. So there's another place I'm like, holy shit balls, there is more judgment at the church end of things, which is so not Christ-like, so not what God is seeking. He is seeking to come into wholeness. And so anytime you start going into something and saying, I'm doing it because of this, it's separating from actually what the core of it is.
Amen. So because that's so, when you are being authentic here, and here's why this matters, and this is where it takes us to like this profound deep origin for me. Like, for example, let's say I don't drink alcohol because it's against the law or my religion or whatever, and then I become one day, whatever it makes me snap. And this is why, by the way, why, teenagers get alcohol poisoning, all this stuff. They finally can do something they're prohibited to do.
Exactly.
And they lose their damn mind. So like by prohibiting that, I'm not saying it's a weird balance, because I mean, they're children, their prefrontal cortex is developed, all that stuff. I'm not insinuating like let your kids drink alcohol, but like it's against your divine nature to be told what to do. And because you are a fractal of God, which is a cool Seneca quote I saw the other day, you can know the truth of all things internally, because when you behave in a way that is righteous, that is love, it's going to, and by the way, there is no such thing as my truth or your truth. It is more accurate to say your perception, but deep down, we all share the same truth. We all share the same love. So if I'm being authentic, and only if I'm being authentic, do I actually have the opportunity to be a human and choose love or separation. If you aren't being authentic, and again, you experience the byproduct, you have, let's say I do what's right, it will feel good for starters. I will start to see fruits of my beingness in the world, friends that show up, which, by the way, AKA the grace of God, comes in that form. Right. These other aspects of God that are all around you, right? They will be saying, hey, yeah, this was spot on. Whereas if you do stuff that's out of alignment with your own will, it's not like you're trying to be compliant to God's will over there. This guy which isn't a guy, but this person in the clouds that wants you to be subservient to something that you don't want to do. You actually want the same thing because you are the same thing. You have the same will. So when you deviate from it, you suffer. And I just don't see how one could truly ever be bought in to anything unless they have authentically chosen into it. They've done so via a conscious choice in their own volition.
Because so when we're talking about authenticity, when we're talking about vibrations, and this is something I brought up to you recently that I'm starting to witness or observe, I used to feel love was one of the most powerful energy fields, right? That it would expand. But witnessing is actually authenticity vibrates like 4 times higher than love, because it's actually loving yourself and coming into your authenticity without judgment or what you think you should be doing. It is a genuine. So when you're saying that, even if there's somebody who's very authentic and you might not agree with their preferences, we admire them. Why do we admire them? They are free. Yes. They are living out. There is no limiting beliefs. And a lot of times authenticity, it doesn't need to be some crazy thing, but it's, I'm living in my authentic nature, right? And so in that meaning, like, for example, I go to church, right? I go to a Methodist church or whatever. And it's funny because I've had some clients who have been going through some religious trauma, right? Who, when they find out I'm going, because they're coming to me and I'm doing all these things that are out of the box and maybe not what church would associate it being or whatever. So they kind of, their image of me is like, oh, well, you're free. You wouldn't. And when I tell them I go to church, there's almost like this disgust of like, why would you do that? And I'm like, because I'm free. I'm making the choice. My church doesn't hold me like saying I have to be there every Sunday. That doesn't hold control over me. I hold control over myself. I'm able to make conscious choices. And if it aligns with my spirit, great. And if it doesn't, I just don't take it in. Right. But that authenticity too is, guess what? When people are in alignment with their authenticity, they can't be bought. Again, they are living in their freedom of exactly what the expression that they were sent here to be. And part of what I've experienced doing the work I'm doing, Ram Dass said quite a bit of, we're just walking each other back home. And part of what I'm doing is being able to see the essence, the God light within everybody, their pureness before they started having this human experience, right? And for all of us, we get placed into the first container of our life. And we don't know, that could be in some great household where it's loving and supportive. it could be in a freaking shithole where you're like in a third world country and like you're literally trying to survive just to go get food and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the essence, and so then we start getting formed into these programming systems of this is the way it is and this and that. And the whole process, at least what I've seen on this, why we're here on this earth plane, is to come back into our wholeness, our authenticity. And a lot of that is starting to break through the egoic operating system and asking questions. Am I doing this? And I'll ask even my clients too, because like even for politics, right? Some people come in and they're like, well, I'm this way because they've been immersed in it. And then they just start echo chambering the same thing they're hearing. So I'll stop them and just go, and it does, I'm just using politics as an example, but I'll ask them, do you actually believe that? Are you listening to what you're saying? Is that your truth? Do you align with that? Because there's a lot of times, and I'm using politics as a good one, because there's a lot of times when I'm talking to people, they're like, yeah, well, I'm with this party. I don't totally agree with all of it, but then they'll like rally for it, right? So that's not authentic. And so it's one of the ways that I work with my clients is starting to witness the thought process. Is this aligning with how you truly feel? Not think, feel, right? And so that feeling is starting, and that's what's so beautiful is when you really start getting into the authenticity. Like I know right away if it's going to serve me well or not, but I've also been practicing this for a while and coming into awareness. It's an exercise, and it's not something that just happens overnight, but it's in the process of it is an undoing process, right? So like part of when we're talking about sin and stuff, it gets into this complexity, like, well, you can't do this or that. It's not, yes, you can, but the reality, like you said, is you're not living in God's will, so you're feeling the suffering of it, right? So those rules were put in place as guidelines. Like, if we want to go into the 10 Commandments, right? When those were put in, it was very like, do not cheat on your spouse, do not steal, it was very blunt in that way. When Jesus came in on the Sermon on the Mount to start talking about the Beatitudes, oh boy, did he start shifting things, because what I feel he was doing was giving the reasoning behind what those laws were put in.
The context, the essence of the gospel, which is a spiritual, so that's why, that's the issue with the mind, is it is incapable of discerning something spiritual essence.
Thank you.
And that's why Christ also taught in parables, so like you get the gist of it.
Because he can't. So let's talk about some parables, right? I was just had a client and we were just talking about this. One of the hardest parables to digest is the one with the guy who has the workers who come and he starts paying them. So the first wave of people who comes in, he's like, okay, here's what I'll pay you for the day, right? And then all of a sudden the guys who were sleeping in show up around 12, 1 o'clock or whatever. And like, hey, can we get work? And he's like, yeah, sure. And I'll pay you the same amount I paid everybody else. The mind, why that is so hard to grasp. You can't grasp it through here. It's like every time you try to think about it, you keep hitting a roadblock because it's like, well, that's not fair. That's not fair, right? Because it's a dualistic thinking. What they're trying to express in that is the essence of everybody is worthy. There is not one price everybody is part of this party, right? But you cannot see it through the eyes of the mind because it limits you, right? So to be able to come from the eyes of the spirit, which is a totally different viewing point. Because it comes into wholeness, and even there is sometimes hard to digest, because this guy usually tries to hijack it. But when you start coming in at the essence of things, there is a realization that there is nothing separate. So what the mystics are all trying to communicate through whatever religion, right? Because they're in everyone. They're the guys who are like, hey guys, I get what you're saying, but you're missing the whole message. There is actually zero separation. Zero. And so the spirit, when you come through the spiritual eyes, sees it of nothing but wholeness. And then it shifts in this understanding of, prior to coming out of spirit, like meaning out of the egoic operating system, it's a competing, everything has a placement. Nothing can be like, hey, we're all good, right? So it's like, you're less than, you're better than. It's a judgment. When you start coming from the fruit of the spirit, it's discernment.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Which is, and that is one big, I would say, contrast between the two of when you start coming in the spiritual essence of things. there's a lack, there's no you start to have a discernment. That doesn't mean I'm like, hey, everything's good and I'm going to tolerate you being mean because you're part of the whole. No, I'm also going to come in with discernment and say that's not loving.
Yeah, the sword of truth is discerning, and it can create obviously disruption because it's not loving for you to basically abide in non-integrity. So
Right.
When someone's mistreating you or someone else, you actually have an obligation to uphold like a place of integrity. And that's by the way, I've had this discussion with pacifists before, and I'm like, no, there's a time. Love isn't always obvious what the loving thing to do is. And that's why you need to have this the body awareness, because the mind's super tricky. So some of my friends are really wrestling right now with how do they, what I don't like to see is when someone's religious, grows up with all this structure, and then they know something's not quite right, and then they abandon the whole thing. They leave. I feel like 80% of religion, or I don't know percentage. Most of it's spot on. There's just a couple things that you can see them with the mind layer. You can actually identify, oh, is that separateness? Is that putting authority outside myself? Basically, anytime you put something between you and God, be that authority, be that, hey, why don't you tell me if I'm worthy to do this thing? That's the biggest crock of shit ever. But I understand it's an error, but still, there's so much other good truth there. And it's possible, by the way, if you are sovereign, if you are authentic, and if you're only ever consciously choosing into everything you do, you could go to a church where you don't disagree with like 2 or 3 fundamental things about that church, because it's just not, it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And you can still take all the good stuff. You can still be in a community. I actually saw a scripture. So I've been wondering what was the meaning of having these apostles and prophets and stuff back in the day, but I like the one where it says, in Matthew 18:20, for where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them.
Amen. Wow, I brought that up about 3 times today.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did, because the idea of that I have to go to an institution, or I have somebody, and a lot of this, thanks to the Catholic Church, started kicking in of, well, you don't have access to God. You can come to this priest and you can pay him to get you that access, right? And so that's where the separation started coming. Now, we are here put in place actually to be in relationships because we learn and mirror from them. But if we are not conscious, we're just playing this game that doesn't deepen, right? So in a mirroring, like, for example, if you and I, like, well, because we are in a relationship, if you, and like as a friend, if you start doing things that are not serving your higher good, I'm not going to come in to dictate and be like, Richard, I'm going to come in a loving way that's like, hey, man, you're better than, like, I know you, man, you're acting out of character. Like, are you sure that's the right choice you want to make?
Right.
Like, come on. And so that feeling inside, and it's funny because as a little girl, now reflecting back and not having any idea, I remember being like so fiery and being like, why the hell do you have to make me go to church to tell me what's right or wrong? And I remember telling my mom, I'm like, I can feel it. Like, it's right here, nice. And I don't need, and that's the part of, nobody is going to punish me outside as much as I feel it internally.
Right.
And that's another thing that Jesus, heaven and hell are not destination points, folks. They are, why he said it. I think I can't remember if he said that more, either treat your neighbor, like treat your enemies, like your friend. What was it? Love
thyself.
Love thyself. But the other, sorry, I'm totally chopping it up. But the other one too is, the kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom, he didn't say it's over here. He didn't say go to Florida and hop on this cruise ship and you're going to hit it. He's saying
which that by itself is pretty much heaven.
I know. That's why I always compare it to. When I was a kid, I really did think heaven was a cruise ship. But meaning now, it's not bad. It could be. But that it is internal. It's not. And so when I'm working with people, and one of the things I've even learned in my parenting recently, I don't need to tell them. I don't have to criticize them. I don't have to tell them they didn't meet the mark. They're internalizing. They already feel it. I don't need to shame them on that. No. And so for all of us, when you are experiencing the depths of hell, it's because you are separated from what is in your authenticity, what is supposed to be in your wholeness.
Yeah, so so in the authenticity thing, if you truly love someone, you have to also respect their sovereignty, their ability to f around and find out.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to be supportive, and you don't want to, out of love and respect for yourself, the way I imagine it, you taught me one time, was to imagine like your child in your shoes.
Yeah.
That will tell you instantly what the most loving thing to do is. It might be get the hell away from that friend, why they spiral, or it might be like what you just said earlier, like, hey, look, are you sure you're cool? Like, are you sure things are right? But you have to love and respect and support everyone's authentic battle for a conscious life, and everyone has to go through that at some point.
They do. Like, so I'm just going to use you as an example right now. You just had a really big breakthrough this weekend, right? Where you were able to see things that I've been trying to place out there over and over, right? If I would have come into you right off the bat and been like, damn it, Rich, look at this. Like, it's right here, right? Which I cryptically have told you. But anyways, if I was putting force on it, that is not loving at all. Right. And I knew I have a deeper knowingness that in this part of my process of getting for you, and two, what I want to back up to was this wasn't my idea, like meaning your seeking wasn't me being like, well, this is how you need to do it and this is it. It's just you wanting to come into it. So me on the outside has been doing this, like just like boop, boop.
Yeah.
I'm going to tap you over here. I'm going to reflect things. I'll pose questions back to you, but you have to find that on your own.
Right.
And to support. And then when you start going in certain ways, and then you would I'd be like, don't do that, but not in a forceful way. Yeah. Because love itself, like love is patient, really at the core of it. Love does not have any expectations. It really doesn't. It's pure. It is gentle. But it also isn't just like laying over on the side, like I said. So it comes in with discernment. It comes in of like, here's a loving way and help guiding this way. But and what I would tell you at that part too, is a lot of a witnessing position, meaning coming into a place without an agenda. So the mind always comes in usually with an agenda. The spirit's agenda is to be nothing but free, authentic, and nothing but loving awareness itself. That's it.
Right.
That is it. Right. And so in that meaning, if I come into my mind of trying to help you, then I have an agenda. But when I'm coming of the pure heart, there's no agenda except for all I want is for you to be able to see you the way I can see your light. Right? Is for you to be able to see it and accept it, honor it, and to embrace it.
I love it. And I felt really grateful because I recognize too that, like I said at the beginning, we're sort of stuck where we are and can't really be different than we are until we draw on a higher power. And the way that power... The whole prayer thing seemed pretty cryptic, even though, like, if you get into quantum mechanics and stuff, which I had a discussion with not our David, another neuroscientist that was an atheist, most of them are, about how prayer works via, quantum mechanics. And, like, that's somewhat of an understanding, but it seems still cryptic on, like, how, in a literal sense, that God helps do the things that, that you're praying for. And then if you literally just take a second and look around at your life and your friends and the really unique, it doesn't just seem, I know it to be a true thing because I've read it and I've seen it reinforced many times, but you're always getting what I have a new word for it, because I saw Peter Thiel was on an interview, and I can't remember who was interviewing me, said, do you consider yourself lucky, or I can't remember the other word, awesome, for being so successful? And he said he considers himself fortunate. He said that was a kind of a tricky question, because if you say you're lucky, it kind of like negates anything that he put on his end, and then the other one kind of denies the fact that he's been blessed. So the thing that we can do on our end is we apply this earnest intention, which is the prayer, and then it's by God's grace that the other part comes in and helps lift us out from our whatever that way of being is into a higher way of being.
Which is really what you're saying is manifesting, right?
Right.
Which then goes into let's get deep. Manifesting, we're all manifesting. Everybody, whether you're conscious or not, right?
Yeah.
But what manifestation ultimately at the core is a realization that the creator of all creation is within me, and I also have a hand in it.
So one of the, just like what we were talking about earlier, the New Age spiritualism, like decision between everything matters or nothing matters. That's the nothing matters is the spiritual bypass. It's the Hakuna Matata from Lion King. All that. There's the same thing exists there for this principle that we are creating, we are manifesting, and a lot of times people will use that teaching. So here's an example of the mind. The mind says, okay, I just read this thing, and now I can actually abdicate responsibility on God for everything that's going on in my life because there are no accidents. God wants, this is all where everything's supposed to be. Yes, it is where it's supposed to be. It's exactly where you've kind of created it.
Right.
And so that's why I say we're getting what's fortunate for us, because if you don't like what you're experiencing, then that is the way that God works to help catalyze a change. So if you don't like the fact that all your relationships are terrible and abusive and whatever, and oftentimes you see the same thing happening. Someone gets divorced, remarried, divorced, remarried maybe 3 or 4 times and marries the same archetype, Well, these were all, you could have used that as a catalyst like from the beginning, but if you're not going to make the choice to actually be open and conscious of it, you're doing what's called unconscious suffering. It's not the ignorance is bliss, it's the ignorance is unconscious creation. And
because God, what I at least believe is every experience is an opportunity to come into wholeness. And that's the part of will, right? Like God isn't forcing, he's not like, everybody, you have to do that. He's like, and in it though, when you do start to get like a lot of times what I would say too is what I see over and over is those who are coming into consciousness is because the suffering has gotten so bad and all the tools and the things that they have been trying to cling on to on the external are no longer working. And so it's an opportunity to go inward and start asking that question, what am I seeking? What brings me into wholeness, right? Not what society's telling me, not what my religion or whatever, because a lot of it is like, well, you should do this and you should do that, right? So then we're in this comparison where it's like honoring your authenticity, again, honoring who you are, and that is a whole nother avenue, but a lot do not get there without suffering. Yeah. I have really not seen it otherwise.
Right. Well, it goes what you just said. I mean, and what we look at suffering, and people apply good and bad to everything. Instead of saying good, bad, which is a personal judgment or position about something, it's really just a positive or negative. So you did something that's positive because it's in alignment, or you did something that is negative and that it wasn't in alignment, and either one's a blessing. We benefit from the positive. We benefit from the negative in the sense we just learned something about ourselves that we can change.
Right. And then and here's the key too. When it feels better, when it feels good, it's good, right? There's a contentment. Here's something that I see across the board with souls. I would say one common characteristic across the board is souls are looking for contentment.
Yeah.
They're just looking to be, and what contentment is just peace, right? It's just coming into this wholeness. Our minds create all these crazy scenarios and separateness, and I'm only good if I do these things, and if I live in this neighborhood, I'm of value and success. So like, even when I'm working with clients, a lot of times I'm like, okay, what is so fascinating is a lot of times we'll get these dreams and we'll lock it in, like the beginning of a relationship, right? And so they'll come in and they're like, well, I'm suffering. This isn't working anymore. I'm like, yeah, because you guys are holding on to your dream and your image of when you were 20, before you had kids, before you had the career you have now. And so you're still suffering. You're constantly suffering because you've put these crazy expectations in here, and they're always external. That's what I'm trying to say. They're always this like, well, if I get this or that. So when you're starting to come into the spirit, it's internal. What is it that what fulfills you, right?
Right.
A lot of times it's never, I have yet to hear people be like, well, it's the boat that gave me happy. It's not the boat. It's when they're having the experience and they're with their people they love or whatever. That's what they're really seeking. And they're seeking, and because when they have all their people there and they're happy or whatever, there's a contentment, right? Yeah. It's not the actual thing. But when you start going in and you start coming, and here's something I tell my clients too. Once you pose the question, like if you are starting to seek of like, I'm curious and I want to go in, but then it's also overwhelming because it's like, well, how do I even get there? Like, how do I, it's actually been here the whole time, but how do I navigate that, right? So you, even by posing the question or becoming present, like, what am I seeking? As soon as you do that, you're actually bypassing the egoic operating system and you're present itself. And when you're present, guess what? Like matches like energy. So the presence will come, like the internal will start to speak to you. So it's learning a new language. Like that's something else I tell people. We have been trained again at a very young age to go external. What is so-and-so doing? We compare, we do all those things instead of going internally of what brings me peace? What makes me tick? What brings me joy? What makes contentment, you know?
So in that regard, selfishness, you could say like spiritual endeavor is actually, I always looked at it as like this sacrifice and this thing where you would do it out of penance and out of this punitive God that you'd sacrifice and just go do these things that you don't really want to do. But the reality is when you being selfish, capital S, is actually a noble endeavor. Yes. And Gandhi said, I was at a missionary farewell, and then this kid's going to Thailand. I wrote him an email, but I time-stamped it for like 4 months later because he's not going to be able to, he needs to be there a while before he digests it, because here he is talking to all these people that I'm sure they know who Jesus is, but the Eastern theology is different, but it's actually saying the same thing, just a different way. But he said, he gave the quote, Gandhi, to find yourself, capital S, lose yourself, small case s, lower self, ego self, lower mind, in the service of others.
Totally.
So when you serve, when you love others, when you give this thing, you are giving it to yourself, and you start discovering your higher self. And the more your higher self is uncovered, the more peace you have, the more blessing you have. So it really is selfish in the sense of, it's not like anyone's promoting. I would never promote, hey, just spend your life doing stuff for other people because it sucks, but you owe it to them.
Yeah.
It's actually gratifying and it feels good, and everybody feels good when they help somebody, when they serve somebody.
It is the ultimate, yes, because what is happening in that is an exchange of energy. It's a selfless act. It's a powerful exchange. You know, a lot of what I'm working with clients, I mean, my whole entire purpose is to help bring people into their wholeness, to be able to see who they truly are in that authenticity. And in that process, it's going in and asking and questioning a lot of that programming, like, and getting them to the point, because a lot of them are really, really, the majority cannot take their own worth. They can see other people's worth, but they do not feel worthy themselves, right? And so that big S is starting to say, I'm just as deserving as the people I'm serving as well. I'm part of the whole as much as everybody else is. And it's not selfish in the way the ego thinks it's selfish. It's actually a very loving thing, because once you start honoring yourself, it's not even about that. It's again, like you said, it's this exchange of service. It's like, I have like in my conscious state, I am very well aware that if I hurt myself, I'm actually hurting the whole. And if I hurt the whole, I'm actually hurting myself. Right. So you start to shift, and again, that's shifting out of the separation of the egoic operating system that puts things in placement of better, compare all the things, right? Into there's a wholeness, which is totally a different ball game. But again, we have not been trained that way. Like since as soon as we come out of the womb, right?
Yeah, I'd say part of it's being trained that way, but part of it's also when you are operating, like we said, 80 to 85% of the globe is operating in the animal instinct. You're only ever interested in the lower self-interest, and and even politically speaking, someone's, I will get more money from this person, or whatever the benefit you perceive from this one person, instead of looking at it from like a macro perspective and being, what is going to benefit the whole? And you don't start thinking that way until you start tipping into these spiritual, levels.
Right.
And so the best thing that I know we can do is elevate our own level as high as possible so that we can permeate and influence, the field around us, and people will start to feel, not just think, and they'll start to pursue the, higher self-interest instead of the, lower self-interest. But one thing about the whole church stuff is, just like you were saying at the very beginning, there's a way to integrate the mind, which you've heard of. We talked about the Zoroasters before. You heard of them? It's like one of the oldest religions. I think there's only 2 million members right now, but I want to say like 1500 BC, they were this religion, and the organization was so obsessed with like rituals and ordinances and that kind of stuff. They were like missing the whole point of the gospel. And this one person had, and I got to read about it more, but he had this deep spiritual experience, but it sounded very similar to Christ and the Pharisees, where you had the mind's creating all this structure, which, by the way, we don't have time to get into it today, but that what we were talking about the other day with the masculine being structure and chaos being there's so much structure that it actually just was losing the essence of what it's supposed to be. So that seems to be like this archetype, and right now it's really obvious to me that we have some level of this, kind of Pharisee stuff going on. And I'm not trying to condemn it and everything along with it. I'm just saying, if you can be authentic and you can really get settled in yourself, and you be bought in, impervious to other people's judgment and this idea of like deferred authority or whatever it is that you've placed outside of yourself, I believe you can influence people. You can still go to church. You can go and participate. You don't need to abandon everything that you grew up with. And because you need community. It's great to have community.
Absolutely.
Like, you absolutely need the love and support to handle this life, which can be so brutal at times. So that was something I just definitely wanted to talk about for the close friends of mine. And like, we had this weekend that I know are battling with that, and battling with because their parents have expectations.
Right.
We expect you to do this. And this poor person's like an incredible person, but completely miserable on the inside because she feels a failure to meet these stupid freaking expectations.
Right.
And those expectations don't respect the sovereign nature of the human experience. They don't respect your gift from God to authentically fumble your way, however disastrous it might be, however sinful it might be, back to God, back to oneness, back to what you call wholeness. That's your God-given right, and I don't feel like that's respected today in a lot of places. So I want to call that out. I also want to integrate that thing so that everyone can come
so along. The person you're talking about, I also know, and one of the things what I try to encourage my clients going through this, because isn't it a fascinating thing? She's actually coming from a loving place because she doesn't want to disappoint her parents because she loves them, right? So she wants to mold to their expectations. However, it's creating a ton of suffering because it's not aligning with her authenticity, right? And so one of the things that I will encourage my clients coming in going through this, because it's scary. It's like it's going up against the tribe. And it goes even into a more primal level of like when you're little and you're part of a tribe, part of why you don't go against it and you're not even conscious of it, it's like, I don't want to get kicked out of the tribe because how am I going to eat? How am I going to survive? Right. So it's this very ingrained into us to survive. But what we do is we end up giving all of our power to it. So what I encourage my clients who are going through this is to start posing questions, start asking the why. So when you're being told, like, for example, with this gal, of her parents are condemning her because she's not following this rule and this rule, it's to go back to go, why? Why is that? Tell me, explain to me why this is so important. Does that really change who I truly am if I'm not going?
Or how you feel about me?
Yes. Because here's the other thing. What they are projecting is their fear as well.
Right.
Which is not loving at all.
No.
So there's something else I want to talk about real quick to bring up. There are two fields in the energetic field. There is a positive and a negative. It doesn't mean good, evil, anything like that, but it's abundance or scarcity, okay? You're either in victim. Another way to say that is you're a victim to what is going on. You're unaware, and so you're just in a reactive state.
Unconscious suffering.
Unconscious suffering. And the other way is to be in awareness and abundance. And so when you have people who are like, I'm coming from a godly place, but they're unconscious of it, right? They're creating so much pain and suffering because they're excluding from the whole, which is so fascinating too, because I'm also like, hey, remember that guy Jesus, the one that we're like based all these religions off of, or at least over here in the Christianity section. Hey guys, that is hello, do you remember the guy who was like walking down the street and went and like talked to the Samaritan, right? Or talked to the woman at the well who was like they weren't even supposed to communicate because they were different places. Then she's a woman. He's not supposed to talk to her. She's also a woman who slept with other men. It's also on the Sabbath, like breaking all of those rules, like, right? There's all these rules in place. Right. But Jesus was able to go, that is not it. It's actually coming in and witnessing and seeing somebody and giving them the grace to be able to come into their own, right? There's nothing more loving. Have you ever had an experience where you felt like you wouldn't be welcome somewhere or something, or you just felt out of place, and you end up going to the place and you're already kind of on edge because you feel separated, and then that person who you've already been like, oh, they're over there, actually comes and welcomes you?
Right.
What a beautiful feeling. I mean, that's what Jesus was trying to do too, is like, don't exclude anybody. Welcome everybody in. There is no separation. And so again, so I kind of derailed there, but one of the things that I do encourage people is when they're going through that is to ask the question, really get to the core. Again, we're in this echoing chamber of like, do, but like deepen. Why are you saying you believe in that? What is that reason?
Right. And we often look at our parents or peers in that way as if they are so wise. And that's one of the things I learned growing up is I'm like, no, I didn't know nobody knows what the hell's going on, even when you're older. And anyone that thinks they know what's going on, run. Yeah. Run, because the Socrates quote, true knowledge exists in knowing that you know nothing. Right. Holds true. I mean, and so our parents, sometimes these are just children, and the behavior that people have is always, it's almost always control. An unhealed child that's, behaving in a certain way. And so I don't know, sometimes that happens too, which is brutal, because we're trying to meet the expectations of another injured child that just happens to be older,
happens to be our parents.
Yeah,
happens to be,
but is like freaking as lost as you are. But in this case, my opinion, way more so.
This is why the importance of coming into wholeness and doing the internal work is so important. You're not going to go out and change the world till you change yourself. Yeah. And so by coming into wholeness, so let's just use this example where we do have parents and they saying, well, you have to believe in this certain way. You have to follow these religious practices, or we're totally disappointed in you. And
it's conditional.
Oh, yes, it's very conditional. But what's really fascinating is as one starts to come into their own, right, the expectations start to fade. It's not this separateness. It's this, I'm just living from my truth, which creates a space of grace for others, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody's such in judgment and their idea is like, well, this is the way it's supposed to be and this and that, and somebody go like Jesus, for example, came in to be like, there's another way. There's a way that's loving, that's accepting, where we can all bring everybody. And two, quite frankly, I don't want to hang out with everybody who sees exactly like I do. That would be really boring, right? But also like come in to be like, well, tell me more about that. Like, explain to me why you see it that way. Instead of coming in again with judgment, and come in with curiosity, right?
Right.
What is that? Like, why do you feel that way? Each and every one of us, when you're saying fractal, or we are each and every expression of God, and part of that is coming into our wholeness. Like, what God is seeking for us is not following the rules so much as coming into wholeness and being able to see our worth as He can see us, and we can usually see others, but not our own.
It happens to be that the rules in the right context, not always, but in the right context, happen to be a symbol of what is actually your divine will. That's why they can be helpful,
right?
More as of a, you can save a lot of suffering if you don't steal from somebody,
right?
For example. Just here's just like a little.
Yeah.
Here's like a little, let me save you some suffering by letting you know this thing. Not God's going to come and just punish you. You are going to punish yourself because you're going to gyrate negative karma into the field, this unlimited field of creation, and you're going to propagate having stolen from somebody, which it's like throwing a boomerang. It's going to come right back and smack you right in the face, and maybe not in your current lifetime, maybe next one, whatever, but it is that way. In that way, God is just, and that's why I say, we're always getting what's fortunate for us because it is of our creation. And by the way, the only thing that I found with my religious upbringing, and I don't see it in the doctrine anywhere, but that's at odds for this thing. Actually, it believes in a premortal life and all that too. So even if you don't believe in reincarnation, which is something I've come to believe, and even if you don't believe in that, if you believe we existed before this life, you can at least concede that there's decisions that were made. There's things that happened that would dictate that you're born into the situation you're in, the parents, the circumstance. If not, if there's just like this random distribution of humanness, that would suck so bad. And that's not a loving God.
No, it's not random.
Right.
And it's so fascinating when you were just talking about that analogy too of stealing. It just brought me back to like something I haven't remembered forever. But I loved sugar when I was a kid, like a crackhead. Like I was like, oh, and when you were just saying that, so my dad kept a bag of Hershey Kisses up in the cabinet, and he's like, he would just have one every night, just one. Well, every night I would also just have one, and I would take it and I would stash it away in my room. And then on Saturday mornings, I had their old like black and white like TV in my room, and I'd watch cartoons, and I would get out this stash. And it was in talk about funny, because I was like, ooh, I'm so excited to eat my chocolate. I never enjoyed that damn chocolate because I felt so bad eating it every time, because it was a disconnect. Like, and nobody was even sitting there saying like, this is what's going right. Like it was this internal meaning. Like my moral compass is like, you're never going to enjoy this Hershey Kiss because you stole it from your father, like it's not honorable. And so those things, like, yes, they're set in those rules, but it's really about what's eternally infecting you, like internally in that way. And I don't know if I'm derailing, but
well, you want, and that's, by the way, the relationship, a relationship that I want, and I want is that, in fact, my son, I got him a new iPhone for Christmas, and then he finally told me, he's like, Dad, the other day, I didn't tell you, but my phone fell in the toilet, and after that, it stopped working very well. And I was like, buddy, like, were you afraid to tell me? Like, I wish you could have told me. Like, you wouldn't have been in trouble. Like, stuff happens all the time. We all, like, I've had multiple phones fall in the toilet. Back in the day when we had those little phones, I think 3 or 4 times, like, but So I've got room to, because I saw that happen now it's an opportunity for me to go over the fact that we're all kind of fumbling through this, doing what we perceptively believe to be the smartest thing at the time. And when we mess up, I don't want him to feel additional condemnation above and beyond what he's already going to feel energetically. He's already going to feel these negative emotions. He's already going to propagate into the field, potentially the byproduct of that stuff. The last thing he needs is additional condemnation. And that's a hard thing to unwind. If you grow up that way, then you've got to change that. But I want to be this loving fractal that's just being, like you said earlier, like just kind of steering and just being supportive and letting them authentically fumble, and then just like giving hug there. It's
even with that in parenting, like shifting. Well, this goes hand in hand. Like as I've really have shifted and thank God with the help of your father the last couple of years, but seeing things differently. Like, so as coming conscious, breaking out of this old programming of like being hard and these expectations and things like this, what I learned is I was like, that's actually making things worse. Like to your point, like I'm just contributing to what they're already feeling separate and so now shifting in this conscious, like, instead of like coming in with these and adding to the expectations, coming in as loving awareness and having conversations of like, well, you just made that choice. It probably wasn't the best choice, made you feel really uncomfortable, right? And it's like, yeah, it did. Like, I'm not going to do that anymore, and giving the grace and that, and for my grace too, lots of grace. I'm learning lots of grace from her, but it's a shift in this, like, I don't need to come in with judgment. I don't have to come in with all these hard things. It's like, now it's just this like loving, like, hey, what can I do for you? And let me guide you in this way, because ultimately all I want is for my children to be able to go in the world and be able to feel sound and to be able to have contentment and to be good humans that are serving the whole, and by shifting into this place, like, meaning a lot of it was this external of like, well, you should do it this way and this way, instead of coming into this space of like, that's coming into loving awareness. Again, it's a whole different approach. And man, wouldn't it be awesome if the churches did that?
Right.
Like, without the judgment.
Yeah, well, and they, in a similar fashion, it's just an errant behavior. And so love your children, provide, these guide rails, love your religion, provide this thing, and be a part in letting it heal, because it has to heal, or else it's going to propagate. Religion's sort of losing numbers like crazy. Yeah. And so if they want to stay in business, they've got to evolve to a higher state of operation that matches the state of its members. And so in that sense, I hope they evolve. I don't want to see organizations crumble. I'd rather more people get to go to religion and have a more loving experience. And anyway, hopefully people that tune into our podcast can, I'd love to answer specific questions anyone has, but this is a big topic. A faith crisis is like a divorce, faith crisis, major death in the family. There's like a few things in life that are can be absolutely catastrophic. And if you don't have a community, like a religion, or this, we're talking about a good friend circle or spiritual community, or a podcast that can maybe help support you through it, then it can be really difficult. So hopefully we get some questions and keep uncovering the truth to the highest degree we can.
Right. We're just doing the best we can.
That's true.
We're just doing the best we can, but also creating that space, right? That is community. That's loving awareness of bringing in a place for us, like, to be safe, to figure this stuff out, right? Like, nobody's got it completely figured out. We're all in the process of it. So yeah, I do feel like this is a great community in the sense of like bringing those questions here and trying to dive in deeper, figuring out the core, getting rid of all this stuff.
Well, good topic. I'm glad we talked about that today. Our next episodes we have a handful of things we want to talk about, but we'll probably get some feedback and decide then what anyone wants to hear next. But thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah.
Shannon, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Richard, for having us.
God bless you, everybody.
Amen.
Amen. Oh, wait.